This is Melody Pazalt from the Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery. Welcome to our webinar featuring NIAPRIS and Dr. Edie Schwartz and Ruth Cullen-Wagner. We'll get started in just another minute as folks get logged into the GoToWebinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to other staff or to be able to be referenced at a later time. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll get started in just another minute. Good morning, everybody. This is Melody Pazalt. I am the Recovery Support Services Supervisor at the Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery. And joined with me is Patty Marshall, the Peer Support Program Manager for the Division of Behavioral Health. We're so happy to feature NIAPRIS, the New York Association for Psychiatric Rehabilitation Services, and Dr. Edie Schwartz and Ruth Cullen-Wagner to present Conversations That Matter, Operationalizing Recovery in an Institutional Setting. Patty and I have launched the Peer Bridger program in Washington State, and just seeing such a tremendous amount of change in the state hospitals. And we're so glad to be able to bring NIAPRIS out, not only through the virtual technology of webinars, but also bringing them out to Washington State next week for a visit at both Eastern State Hospital and Western State Hospital to be able to have the continued conversation about recovery in an institutional setting. But in preparation for that in-person meeting, we wanted to sort of just orient state hospital staff, our peer bridgers, our community around recovery in an institutional setting, what that looks like. And so this webinar is an opportunity to do that. Just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded so that will be available to other staff who aren't able to join this morning. And so I'm very glad to turn it over to Edie and Ruth to present today. So thank you guys so much for joining us via New York. And so welcome to Washington, and we're looking really forward to hearing your message.
Thank you, Melody. This is Edie, and I'm really happy to be here on what looks like a sort of gray day here in New York when it should be sunny. And next week when I go to Washington, I'm hoping it'll be sunny because it's been nothing but gray or rainy here in New York. So I want you all to speak to the sun gods for me so that I can get a little better weather when I go. So we're happy to be here with you today. And these are the kinds of things that we're hoping to do today. And what we're going to do is we have a long session today. So I hope everyone sits back, kicks back, eats your lunch. Oh, it's breakfast for you. Eats your breakfast, drinks your coffee, and bears with us. We're going to talk kind of at you for about an hour, and then we're going to have a good half hour for questions. Now, on your right of your screen, or it could be on the bottom of your screen, I'm not sure what your screen looks like, you'll see a question box, and I want you to feel free at any time we're talking to write into that question box any questions you have. And at the end of our presentation, we will pull those out and speak with you. There's a number of you on today, so we do have you muted. So we'll have to write those questions in on the question box. And our wizard behind the scenes, Julie, if there is a way to unmute you at the end, we will. But if not, you'll write them in there. And also there's a chat box there. And if you want to make some comments in the chat box, we'll be able to read them back. So I hope you see the question box and the chat box, and we would love you to be interactive in this virtual way until we open up the conversation in about an hour, and then we hope that you'll be verbal in the old way of speaking up. So today we hope to really kind of pass on some understanding of the way that our healthcare landscape is changing from what I'm calling a traditional behavioral health service to one that's recovery oriented. And what I had mentioned as before we started to Patty and Melody was that Ruth and I come from the traditional behavioral health center. We both are social workers licensed by the state of New York. We both have many years experience in direct practice and management of different services for people with serious behavioral health needs. And we have both instituted recovery-oriented treatment and recovery-oriented services within traditional settings in the community. So we're hoping to be able to share some of that with you. We also hope today that we're going to talk about engagement as a very concrete building block to recovery, and also talk about your facilities and where you're working and the strengths and challenges you might be facing in this shift. And then we're going to talk concrete because we like concrete. You know, we're social workers, we love our process, but we also like outcomes. So we're going to talk a little bit concretely about where we think we can go. And then we'll talk much more about that next week when Harvey and Elena and I come out. So just take a few minutes to think a little bit, just a little reflection as we get started. And again, you can chat in some answers in the chat box if you like. You can chat some things, write some things down, or just think about it. What do you personally believe recovery to mean? And what is it and what isn't it? And is it the same as treatment or rehabilitation, or is it different? And what's your understanding of those things? Because these are the issues I think that are really hard to begin to understand. And once we begin to think in this way, to begin to separate out what's what, that's when we can begin to move forward. So the other piece to think about, you know, laying the groundwork really for Ruth to talk a little bit. And by the way, Ruth and I are going to go back and forth as if we're sitting in the same place, which we're not. We're sitting about an hour or so away from each other. But we're going to talk back and forth about things. So I'm going to set the stage for Ruth a little. And the stage I'm going to set here is, where have we been? And, you know, Washington and New York and all the other states, we do a lot of work nationally. We're at different places, but we're generally in the same trend. And the trends used to be maintenance and symptom management and dependence on our state hospitals. And then as we began in New York to empty out our state hospitals with deinstitutionalization, and, you know, I know you have a few hundred people. We had at our top thousands and thousands and thousands of people. I forget the number, but it was in the 10s, 20s, 30s, thousands of people who were in our state hospitals. We had 16 state hospitals, and now we still have quite a few. And so as those people were let out of state hospitals, they became sort of entrenched in what I call the psychiatric ghetto, which is really all things with other people with psychiatric disabilities. So they lived in community residence, they worked in sheltered workshops, everything was siloed. They went to social clubs with only other people with psychiatric disabilities. And everything they did, they were transported from one place to another rather than using regular transportation. And that wasn't because we were bad. It was because we thought that was the way to protect folks. But it's not where we are now. Now we're into recovery-oriented systems of care. We're into being person-centered, trauma-informed. We're into being culturally competent. We're now looking at integrating physical and behavioral health. And we're into helping people maximize their abilities and opportunities in the community. And of course, as you well know, we're understanding the power of peer-delivered services and the peer support for all of us. And we're really not so much about illness as we are about wellness. And the other thing that we never really thought about, we thought about symptom reduction, but now we're really talking about people living a full, satisfying life with satisfying personal relationships. That's a massive change, massive change. And we're all there. You're there, we're there, many other states are there. There should be an arrow between these, because getting there is not easy, and that's what we're going to talk about. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ruth to talk a little bit about recovery and engagement. And for some of you, this will be new, and for most of you, many of you, you will have heard this before, and we're hoping it will just be a refresher and a way for you to connect up. So Ruth, I'm going to turn it to you.
Okay. Thank you, Edie. So what we usually like to do is just start with a definition of recovery to make sure that we're all on the same page. And this particular definition came from SAMHSA back in 2011, the Substance Abuse Mental Health, I forgot, Services Administration, please, I apologize.
You got it.
Oh gosh. And forgive me, I'm going to read this to you. A process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a satisfying, self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. And this is really critical because this was the federal government putting this practice into place, this expectation into place back in 2011. And they did this with community stakeholders that included, politicians and people providing care as well as people receiving care. So it really was a nice group of folks there putting this together. And for me in particular, as a social worker, this definition really just speaks to my heart. And this was created by Anthony Cohen, Farkas, and Gagne from Boston University Psychiatric Institute. And this is what I love, and I'm going to read this to you. Recovery is a deeply personal, unique process of changing one's attitudes, values, feelings, goals, skills, and/or roles. It's a way of living a satisfying, hopeful, and contributing life, even with the limitations caused by the illness. Recovery involves the development of new meaning and purpose in one's life as one grows beyond the effects of mental illness. This just speaks to me, especially the recovery involves development of new meaning and the satisfying, hopeful, and contributing life, even with the limitations caused by the illness. And that speaks to me because historically, at least the way I was trained a long time ago, it was you really address the symptoms first and foremost. And as a practitioner, I have seen as well, and I've got a story behind that. I may not tell it here, but maybe Edie can next week with you. It really is where you can live your life while you have symptoms, and by living your life, you actually help facilitate wellness in your life. So with that, I shall continue. So these are what we call the basic principles of working in a recovery-oriented way. And you see, bullet number 1 is recovery is possible. And that really is critical when you're implementing recovery services. And it's critical because if you don't really believe it, really have that aha moment in yourself, in your belief system, then that sometimes can possibly and may possibly indeed come out in your work. And Edie and I often talk about this, the aha moment. And my little story regarding the aha moment is that I had been exposed to NIAPRS conferences for years before I worked for NIAPRS, and it's all very recovery oriented. And yet, and still, in my heart of hearts, I'm outing myself, I didn't believe that recovery was possible for every person living with mental illness. And so I learned to believe that because one day I went to a NIAPRS conference, and there was a psychiatrist, Dr. Mark Raggins, who used to work at MHA Village in California. I'm sorry, I don't know where he's working now. He's very prolific, though. You can look him up. And he, the first psychiatrist I ever met who was focusing on recovery instead of focusing on symptom management alone. And that really was mind-blowing to me because in all of my years in doing social work and managing programs and services, that this really was the first psychiatrist that I was exposed to that really put recovery at the forefront. And that was the aha moment for me, that a person living with mental illness, a person living with serious mental illness has the same goals, has the same hopes, has the same dreams. Life dealt them a different card. And so I felt like this was my responsibility now to help them live out those dreams. So that's my story. I'll keep going. Recovery can occur without professional intervention. whoa, how is that? We're the professionals, right? They don't need us. Well, in actuality, people really need people that are going to support them. And that doesn't mean that they don't need mental health services, but it can occur without professional intervention. And we know that from cultures all around the world. Now, we even talked about this, the third bullet here. Recovery involves more than symptom reduction and can occur even though symptoms reoccur. And absolutely, as a person with some medical illnesses, I can tell you that some days I don't feel so good, and some days work is actually helping me. Recovery is highly individualized, so it's not cookie cutter. You can't just implement one particular policy or practice, for example, and expect everyone that you work with to fall in line. Recovery occurs in the presence of someone who believes in and stands by that person. That could be you as the professional, and that could be their natural support system, family or friends, or a combination thereof, right? And recovery from the consequences of the illness can sometimes even be more difficult than managing the illness itself. And so what am I talking about? I'm talking about frayed relationships, unemployment, being poor, being on benefits, and never getting yourself out of poverty. So that can sometimes be more difficult. So let's go on to what are the risks of us not actually practicing in a recovery-oriented way. And this is really critical because we have such an impactful role in people's lives, and we don't want people to be depressed and lonely. So the risk of not practicing in a recovery-oriented way is the risk of loneliness, demoralization, right? So everything I want, I can't get. Empty time. You know the people I'm talking about. People that have got nothing to do. People like what Edie was saying in the quote unquote mental health ghetto. So they have people with mental illness surrounding them all the time. Not much to do. And of course, untapped potential. They've got hopes and dreams that never were able to do that. And so we are here to help them do that. And it's important to know this really isn't the result of the mental illness in particular. This really is a result of the system around people. It's our belief system. It's even their belief system, right? Because if you've been exposed to the mental health system, you're in most of your life or most of your adult life living with severe and persistent mental illness, and then you've come to learn that this is your life. There's no expectation for you, and so now the expectations are changing. I'm sorry, I changed the slide and it's not going.
Let me try for you, Ruth.
All right, thank you.
Let me try. There we go.
Yes, thank you so much. So the theme of loneliness, let's now talk about the risk of loneliness. What happens to people when they're lonely, and what can we do about that? So for us as providers, we can believe in people. Even when they've lost belief in themselves, when they feel that demoralization, it's incumbent upon us to show them that there's hope and for us to believe in them. They are resilient, and we can empower them with that. And bring them opportunities that interest them, or find out by bringing them opportunities, opening up their world is what I call it. So expose them to different people, expose them to family, expose them to hobbies, expose them to the community. So if they want to see a movie, don't make a trip to the movies. Encourage them, help them to form those relationships so that they can enjoy the community in the same way that you and I enjoy the community. And then offer them the resources to be able to take advantage of those opportunities that you're helping to connect them with. And encourage responsible risk-taking. What does that mean? So I've had that question so many times. So yes, doing something when you're not used to doing it and you're used to other people doing it can be very scary. So responsible risk-taking is something like, I can put my fear aside while I ask that girl out on a date, or I can put my fear aside and my doubts, and I will go on that job interview, for example. And this really is responsible risk-taking. So us as providers, we're in a new position, right? Because historically, some of us, and I used to be that person, wanted to take care of the people that I worked with, the patients, and I didn't want them to experience pain or rejection. But then we grow from all of that pain and rejection, don't we? So it's incumbent upon us, it was incumbent upon me as soon as I had my aha moment to really encourage people to branch out and for me to help open up their world. So am I my illness? I so love this. This is from Pat Deegan, and she's a psychologist. She's an advocate. She's an innovator. First and foremost, she was a person living with mental illness, and she is now a peer leader in our field. And so hope really does change everything, and I'd like to read this to you. Once a person comes to believe that he or she is an illness, there's no one left inside to take a stand towards that illness. Once you and the illness become one, then there's no one left inside of you to take on the work of recovery. And I love this because succinctly it says everything that I feel as a provider about recovery. Sometimes it's hard, and I see the people in front of me are fearful and they don't want to take chances. And really, by our belief in recovery and changing the way we practice, we can help them to live that life. Okay, Edie, that's for you.
Okay, great. I'm typing in the chat box. So I'm listening and typing at the same time. So here we gave you sort of this overview of the way that we look at the behavioral health issues and challenges. We look at them as challenges that can be overcome. And we look at people with the most serious illnesses because we understand that you work in state inpatient facilities and that when people come to you, they're probably at their worst. And sometimes when someone is at their worst, it's really hard to see the strength in them. In my clinical days, I used to run the Westchester County Crisis Intervention Team, so I also saw people sort of not at their best. And I learned then that you might have to dig a little bit deeper to find the healthy core when someone is just right in the middle of going through kind of their worst time, but it is in there. And so what we want to talk about now is if you can begin to think about things in the way Ruth said, what does it mean for our practice? Now mine doesn't want to move. All right, Ruth, you have to move me now. Okay. So, Julie, maybe you can make sure we both have mouse control because something is going on here. But we'll move forward. So if you had a transformative recovery service, not one that was just kind of, there's a lot of different ways we look at recovery. Some of them are just adding in some recovery services. Some are adding some peers on. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a real recovery-oriented continuum of care. And if we had that, this is what you would see. And I would tell you that even though in New York we've been pushing this a long time, we don't quite have this across the state. So I don't know any state that has this everywhere. So it's not as if New York is behind or Washington is behind. We're all moving there at the same time. But when I was the executive director of a small treatment agency in the county I live in, about an hour north of New York, I actually had this within my organization because we founded that organization and we set it up. And it looked like this. We had peer leadership at all levels of the system. So not just, a peer support workers, but we had peers. We actually didn't have peers on the board for a number of reasons that I won't go into now that someday we could talk about with board development. But we had an active peer advisory board that funneled back to the board of directors. So we had it from up to the board of directors, including people who worked in the agency who had a lived experience. And what it did was it helped staff to feel good and passionate and supportive, and they knew that they had impact with folks, and they knew that what they thought about people's recovery had a real impact on them. And so that empowered them, and they were passionate. You know, again, we have a lot of stories we tell that we don't have the time to tell here that I'm hoping to talk to you guys about when I'm out there. But one of the things that I learned early on as a crisis worker was that when someone really wants to take their life, sometimes we don't have a lot of impact because sometimes those people don't tell us and they do it without us knowing. But there was a study done recently, actually it wasn't recent, it was quite a while ago, about what the single most important thing is to someone's recovery. And it was actually the belief of the person who's working with them that they could actually get better and have a life. So for me, that said, well, I may not have the power of life and death over someone, but I have the power of recovery in my hands by believing in somebody. And that's very powerful, and it made me very mission-driven and passionate in my work. It's sort of that aha experience that Ruth was talking about. The other thing you would see, and by the way, this is not just a system. I want you to think about this for the unit you work on, all right? Because even in a locked unit, you still can have recovery. And we are going to talk a lot about that. So we want to have a lot of different opportunities for folks, things that they can choose and have a better quality of life. That's what it looks like in a recovery service. Also, look at your rules. You know, it's very interesting. There's a lot of don't do this and don't do that in all of our services. In my agency, I saw all this, no smoking in front of the building, pay as soon as you walk in, you know, no children here, no this here. And all of a sudden I realized nobody said welcome. So I put a big welcome sign out. So, you know, the question becomes, you know, what are your rules looking like? You know, are you able to change some of them, to decrease them, to be more flexible? And really, are we focusing on people being well and on their strengths? Are we really strength-based? Are we moving forward with that and believing in people that they're resilient in the face of challenges? Because we all are resilient in the face of challenge, all of us, whether it's from medical conditions or psychiatric conditions or addictions issues. Ruth, would you move me forward, please? Julie says I have mouse control, but it doesn't seem to want to work. Oops. None of us seem to work. There we go. Oops. Okay. Oh, my goodness. My apologies. Technology only can go so far. Julie, would you go back one, please? No, forward. Okay. So what does this mean for services, what I'm talking about? It means that simple maintenance is no longer acceptable. We don't want to create those psychiatric ghettos. We don't want to have folks only be kept in one place. We want to have people want to move on. And wanting to move on is a sign of health. We're working really hard in New York about folks who have lived a very long time in what out west they sort of call board and care. They're sort of larger facilities. They're called adult homes here. And people don't want to leave. They're afraid. So people who want to leave care sometimes show a spark of life, whereas people who don't want to leave care often are afraid to go out there. And our job is to help them with those fears and move on. And that's an implication of the service provision. So rather than saying the person has no goals, this person has no goals. You know, how many times have you heard that, or how many times have you thought that, you know? But having no goals, there's reasons for that. Being in the mental health system for a long time and not being able to see your way out of an illness creates that for you. So that's something for us to do. And we need to understand that people do have an expertise themselves, but they may not know it. And we may need to nurture that as part of our service provision, especially folks who are incarcerated or people who are hospitalized against their will. That sense of hope really disappears. I mean, you know, Ruth was talking about physical illness, and I have one as well. And sometimes in the middle of my symptoms, I just, you know, my hope starts to dwindle. I don't lose it totally, but I start to think I'm never getting out of this, you know, and it becomes very easy. Think of what it feels like when you have the flu and you're right in the center of it. You think that flu is never going to end. And then all of a sudden you wake up and you feel a little bit better. So the implication for our service provision would be to begin to nurture that feeling of hope out of someone. That alone reduces symptoms. That alone starts to have people think about wellness. And that alone instills hope and belief that the change can happen, and it can be something that's positive. And don't forget the social determinants of health. A lot of folks just don't have a really good life out there. As Ruth said, the consequences of this illness are awful, and one of the biggest consequences is poverty. And so you don't have a job, you've sort of destroyed your family relationships, you don't have a loved one, you may not have your children in your possession, and you may not have a good place to live. So again, pay attention to that in a service provision way, because why would someone want to leave the warmth and good feelings in some ways of a hospital to have nothing on the outside? I'm trying this again. Okay. So how do I increase capacity to provide recovery? What do I do to start to make this happen? We're going to start to get a little more concrete now. And say, what can I do? What can I go and do when I leave here today? One thing is you could fix my computer so that I could change these slides, which would make me very happy. Would somebody please try to move my slide? Thank you. So the first thing we have to do is move our thinking, because first comes our thinking, then comes our action. You know, we need to have a change in heart and mind, and then we can change practice. But if we don't have that change in heart and mind, the practice really doesn't change. So we need to move just a little bit. And the shift is not monumental, by the way. It's just a short shift. And that shift is from looking at what's wrong to looking at what's right about the person, what's unique about this human being. And from seeing people in the context of how many hospitalizations they had, what program they were in, whether they've been incarcerated, to seeing people in the context of their community. So that before the last 6 hospitalizations, they had a child and they had a dog and they had a spouse. And what happened to that situation? And is there a way to return to that? What was in the person's life that was good, and what do they want to go back to? And then also not just look at, you know, an array of symptoms, but looking at strengths and capacities. One of the things I did, and believe me, not in the beginning of my agency, but somewhere along the middle, we changed our intake process. Because what's in the intake? How many hospitalizations you had? What are your symptoms? Tell me what's wrong. How many incarcerations? What medications do you want? We stopped that. We walked in, we said, we're so glad you're here. Tell us your hopes and dreams. And so, of course, that was outpatient, but yet you could do the same. You know, you could walk with somebody right off the bat in the beginning on day 1 and say, I know you're in here right now, you're not feeling so good, but tell me about a time when you did feel good. Tell me what made you feel good. So it's that shift in focus to helping the person to think about when it was the time that they felt better. And then the last one is something that we're not taught in school. We're taught that we're the experts. That burden is tremendous, but we're not the only expert. There's 2 experts in the room, and I don't think we want to forget the other expert either, which is the person themselves. Next slide, please. Great. And the other thing we can do is watch our words, because words have a lot of power. And by the way, I get caught in this all the time still after all these years. And I've been practicing this way since the 80s, but I still get caught in this. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can see it's a slight shift in language. And it really is, think about yourself. How much do you like being told what to do? I'm bad. I come from an older time, and I don't like people to tell me what to do. So I don't like people telling me I should do this and I need that and I must do that and I can't do that. I would rather people said to me, well, you could try this, or have you considered this, or there's a bunch of options. Let's talk about which ones work for you. And instead of looking at what I can't do, I'd like to look at what I can do. So again, see this very slight shift? Instead of saying, I know the best way is, you could say, some choices are. I used to say things like, I like this way, but you may not like this way. Here's some other ways. You can have an opinion. You can say, listen, legally, your way isn't going to be so great for you. I think you're going to wind up in trouble that way, but here's some other options. So it's not that you give up an opinion or good, sound clinical judgment. That's the other thing. I used to love when folks would say, oh, choice means, they want to do whatever. And I'd say, your good clinical judgment doesn't go out the window just because we believe in choice. So you can have an opinion, you have good clinical judgment, but you don't want to impose it on someone else. You want to offer it to someone else. And I think that this is not easy to do. It looks easy to do. It's not easy to do because there's so much going on in our clinical lives that we fall into old language really easily. I'm going to turn it back to Ruth, and I'm going to ask you to flip that slide for yourself because I still can't do it. And now I'm going to read all the messages Julie sent me while you're talking about how to do that.
Okay, so I'll take it from here. When I was director of adult treatment and rehabilitative services, and that was a huge responsibility. And on top of that, I was shifting the culture of the services that I supervised from the traditional model to a recovery-oriented model after my aha moment. And it was difficult. And I had to think to myself, what kind of experience do I need them to have in order for me to be providing that recovery-oriented experience? And I just said to myself, well, what helps me to engage? And so what helps you engage? And I can just think that, when I'm in the community, and whether it's CVS or my doctor's office, what do I want? What do I look for? I look for friendly staff, helpful staff, a clean environment, and so those are things that I might look for. You might look for something else. And so it's taking that personal experience of us as a customer or a patient and really just apply that and look at your environment and look at the way you're practicing to be able to provide that patient experience. And I also think about, our expectations are pretty much the same. Whatever expectations you have in terms of your being a customer or a patient are pretty much the same, whether it's a local store, whether it's a community park, whether it's like an adventure park, or whether it's a library or your doctor. It doesn't really matter. Our expectations are pretty much similar across the board. And if we don't like the place, we leave. And I don't mean to be too simple, but it really was the way that I looked at not just my practice, but the way the services that I managed practice as well. And I thought, I've got the opportunity, if I don't like a place, to leave. But then we think about the people that we work with, and they don't have as many resources as we do. And sometimes the resources are fairly scarce in the community, mental health resources, that is. And so I really felt it was incumbent upon me to provide them with that wonderful care experience as best as I could, and tailor it as best as I could to each person. Because if I engaged them, and that's the key, right? We're talking about empowerment, and we're talking about people growing and learning and having hopes and dreams again and start living that wellness life. And so if I'm going to help them with that, then it's really important for me to ensure that they're coming to services, whether it's, their involvement in inpatient, emotionally involved, and or whether it's outpatient. So they're coming to me not just because it's required, or I said you need to do this group, or you need to have individual sessions, but now they're actually coming because they know they feel better. The steps that they're taking in working with us are helping them to live that better life. And so I want you to think about what helps you engage and consider what would help the people that you're working with engage. And most importantly, we can ask them. I love this slide. Oh my gosh, I love this slide. The Lucy Psychiatric Help 5 cents would be totally out of business, 5 cents. But I love this because it helps me to think about my practice. And just know my practice does not mean, your private social work, mental health practice. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about your practice. Everything you do and say with a patient, that is your practice. So regardless of what your coworkers are doing or what have you, your practice, if you practice in a recovery-oriented way, you immediately affect the individuals that you work with. And we talk about caseloads and whatever that is, whatever it is that you call that, that's that immediate shift from traditional to recovery. So it's never too late. And it doesn't always have to happen at the systems level or at the administrative level. There is that control, there is that ability that we have to empower the people that we work with and to work in a recovery-oriented way so that they could take that and live out their hopes and dreams in time. So what can I do to help the people I work with engage? What can you do? I don't know. You see, that's part of it. What can you do? What do they want? And we talk about person-centered care. Recovery-oriented care is providing that person-centered care for the people that you work with. And so it's asking them, it's really reaching out and finding out what it is that they're looking for. And then to be able to do that in a recovery-oriented way with them and to engage them in a manner that they want to come to services. So the administrative commitment to engagement, we talked just now about the individual providers sort of control around engagement, around your caseload, around, your practice, everything you do and you say. But then, of course, in order to really affect that culture shift in an institution or a unit, you really need to have that administrative commitment. So what does that mean? So we've got administrators to communicate the hospital's vision and your values as they relate to the patient and family engagement. And so if I'm an employee, a spoke in the wheel in this whole unit or this whole institution, I need to know, I need to look at my leaders to understand what the vision is and to understand what the values are so that I can begin to absorb that and institute that in my own practice, in my day-to-day practice. And for you as leaders to serve as role models for engaging in different kinds of partnerships and with including patients and including their families in creating policies and procedures and having an advisory council and listening to their experience of care as a patient or as a family member. All that is important. And so as a leader, as a manager, people will be looking, they look to leaders, right? And you would be their leader. They're looking to leaders to help understand what that vision is and to help them see how to engage people that you really value the opinions of people receiving care in their families. And then to provide the necessary infrastructure and the resources. So what does that mean? I'm not talking about a pencil and pen, although they knew you need a pencil and pen and computer. It really is, let's take an example of training, for example. The resources are you providing the ability for them to get trained. So it's, whatever that is, the paying a trainer, having time away from the regular day-to-day work to go and train, all those resources for the administrator to commit to those resources for the staff. And then there's that follow-up. So the other thing you commit is the supervisor's time and the person's time to be able to dedicate to really learning what it was that they were exposed to during the training, to look at those skills and then practice those skills. Then it's incumbent upon the supervisor and them to really have those conversations so that they turn what they learned during the training into a competency that they're applying every single day. Because all those resources that were dedicated to providing that training can just get lost when it's not followed through and making sure that the person actually learns it and it's being implemented in their works. Involve and support, your clinicians and other hospital staff in patient and family engagement initiatives. And the initiatives we talk about, and I probably will refer to this a bit later, I think, is, for example, let's take engagement implementation or family advisory councils or whatever have you. To consider maybe the administrative support staff should be involved in something like that, because why? And just think about it. They are the first person that people see when they come either on your unit or in your organization. So to be able to help them to be part of that implementation team, and both of them have experience of engagement, so to be able to have everyone work together on these engagement initiatives is really critical. And then integrate client and family engagement into personnel policies and practices. And so if there are certain skill sets that you expect your staff to have, then those that's an opportunity for you to go to human resource and say, we need to relook at certain policies and procedures that we can add certain pieces of it, and not necessarily tasks, right? But the knowledge. All right. So let's keep going. Oh, the staff competencies. Okay, I thought this was much later. And this is really where we're talking about what it is that you're looking for in the staff, in your team, in you, right? As the vision, holding that vision and filtering that vision down so that it can be practiced on a day-to-day level. And so these staff competencies are recovery-oriented care, person-centered care. And you know what's missing from here, I noticed it last night, was trauma-informed care. And all of this, change is a process, not a destination. Dignity, respect, hope, power sharing, shared decision-making, building trust. All of this is really important, because if I am your patient, I will need you to know all of this, and don't get frightened by all these competencies you see in front of you, because many of them are similar. They're similar themes throughout. When you're talking about recovery-oriented care, person-centered care, there are similar themes. So it's not, each of these and all these different competencies underneath all of them. They really are very complementary and go hand in hand with each other. So behind all of that is really the relationship that we create with the people that we're working with. And it used to be where we thought there was that real, we had to keep our distance, and we really just needed to be very professional. Well, yes, don't say Ruth said not to be professional, of course, but there is that interpersonal piece that we're bringing into it. There's that genuineness. There's that belief in recovery that will filter out of you. And I don't mean to be hippy-dippy. Believe me, I'm a very concrete, very pragmatic person. But I know the power of working in this fashion. And I take such pride that I was able, and thanks to NIAPRS, I was able to really make that aha shift, because I made it. I'm one person. But at the time, I was director. And of all, it probably touched like 300 or 350 people's lives as soon as I set the vision and for my services, and shared the values for my services. Yikes, that's pretty loud. And I began the staff training, and I began setting the expectations of the staff. Do we know what this is?
Yes, it's my phone ringing in the other room. I'm going to try to mute.
Okay. So all that is to say that interpersonal relationship and the genuineness of that and the belief in recovery really is forming a culture of healing. And so when you ask, when you share, and when you connect, that's really the magic. And then you're working in a recovery-oriented way. And then the question is, why shift? Why should we go through all this trouble? Why should we be concerned about, the staff and their practice, or having an advisory council, or having an implementation team? Well, we're in this field for a reason, and we have to go back to that beginning piece of us. And that's because people improve. And sometimes, at least for me, I can always speak for me. For me, it was the process, right? So, oh, I'm doing DBT and it's the process, or my staff is doing this, or even worse, how many people showed up today for treatment because I'm thinking about billing? But first and foremost, I'm a person who went into this field because I wanted to help people. And so why should we go through all this work? Because people improve. And people improve when they work harder for a goal that they need and that they want, that they've authored. We talk about that a lot, shared decision making, empowerment, person-centered care. All of that is the person is driving their treatment. And so it's hard to push that boulder uphill, right? You can't say, oh, this is what you need, and I'm going to help you get there. And then what you're doing is you're fighting against gravity. You're trying to push that boulder up the hill. But when we're working on something that the person wants and needs, and it's in conjunction with their wellness, and it's all going in that one direction, even if it would be different from what you think should be happening. But then that person goes with it. They roll with it. You're both working with gravity, and you're both working towards the same end. Sharing power ultimately reduces staff burden. Edie was talking about that earlier, that everyone is just happier and more efficient, and the workplace becomes a place that you want to go to and that you're happy about. Why are you happy about it? Well, you're reducing the burden because you're sharing responsibility for the treatment with every person that you're working with. And on top of that, they're more likely to go with this treatment because they authored it. It's something that they want and that they've identified that they need. As a result, staff retention improves, and that just makes perfect sense. So if I'm happier at my job because I really see that I'm affecting change in the people that I work with, well, then I'm happier, and I would more than likely stay at a place that I'm happy with. And then, of course, patients rediscover and follow their dreams. And I know it's really difficult. Some people who have been a patient in the mental health system for a long time, and you know who I'm talking about, sometimes we've sort of beaten out of them the ability to think for themselves and to even go back to when they were younger and thinking about their hopes and dreams. And we are the people we are today because we had hopes and dreams when we were younger, and that just followed through, and that morphed and changed for us, I'm sure. I'm not an astronaut, I'm not the president, although those were my dreams at one point. But in the end, I wanted to help people. So my dreams morphed and changed, and I feel a purpose in life, and very valued and very purposeful. And so the people that we work with, we need to help them feel those things again. So I've heard some clinicians go, oh my God, she's talking about hopes and dreams again. I don't mean to be hippy-dippy, but yes, people, think about how many times a person has asked you, or asked even them, let's say them, what are your hopes and dreams? The likelihood is that probably no one has asked them what their hopes and dreams are. And so you can be that very first person that brings up those hopes and dreams for them again. And then to figure out how that will morph and change for now. And sometimes you need to help them reconnect with what that is. And so the way I started this conversation was talking about, the person living with their illness for a very long time, being exposed to the mental health system for a very long time. So you forget what those hopes and dreams are. And so we can really help bring that back to them and bring them that hope for their particular future. Lastly, managed care. All right, so we know managed care wants to save money, and it really isn't all about, managed care. But yes, they're looking to save money. But on the positive side, remember, people improve. So if the managed care company is looking to save money, I'm looking for people to improve. That just goes hand in hand. Because if I'm helping people, then rehospitalization rates get reduced. The number of people that are employed, for example, or seeking employment improves. So once people are out living their life, they're less likely to be focused on symptoms and illness. And so that just goes hand in hand with the goals of managed care. This is yours.
Great, thank you. Thanks. So we're running a little bit over, so you have in the handout side these slides in a PDF form. So I'm going to get real concrete now, and I'm going to talk about real strategies that you can use right off the bat when you hang up the phone. And I'm not going to go over all of them. And Ruth is going to have some quality assurance things for you at the end that we're not going to go over all of either, but they're really there for you, and I'll be able to answer any questions for you next week. And we'll be able to answer questions for you by email afterwards. So I'm going to move, you're going to move, Ruth, to the next slide for me,
Sure.
Please. So here are some things to do. We need to begin to move in this direction. So the first thing is, do you have a mission? Do you know what your mission is? Do the people who come on your unit know what your mission is? Do your staff know what your mission is? Adopt a mission that's recovery-based, that's positive. Include the voices of the people who are there in treatment in all your planning and policy and the development of your mission. And then for those of you who are in charge, this is not the way that we were trained as clinicians. We need to provide training. We need not to punish folks for not knowing how to practice in a recovery-oriented way. We need to help people to learn how to practice in a person-centered, strength-based recovery way. And so we need to provide that training. And then it's very interesting. Sometimes we don't look at our policies and procedures for years. I once looked at my policy and procedures about 5 years in, and I took such a gasp, the whole building could hear me. I couldn't believe what was in there. So begin to look at your policies and procedures for what goes on, and look at them. Do they encourage and incentivize people getting recovering, excuse me, that wasn't going to be English, recovering and moving out and getting a life? And if not, change them, because your policies and procedures are what drive your service provision. And then make sure that you're looking at outcomes. What do people want when they get in? They want to calm down, feel better, and get out. And are you really looking at how you're doing with that? And are you working together as a team? Because you can't do these things alone. Next, Ruth, please. Also, who's coming to work with you? You know, we always say this about some of our peer services. When I first started this many years ago, if you had a psychiatric history and you were breathing, you got hired. And that just isn't the way it goes. You have to have a bunch of talents to work as a peer, not just having a lived experience. Well, you also have to have a number of talents to be a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a social worker on an inpatient unit or in an outpatient unit or in a residential facility. You have to have a certain number of talents to, or a certain way of looking at life to work in a recovery-oriented program. When I moved my agency over to recovery, a number of people left respectfully. They said, I see where you're going. I'm sort of with you in my heart, but I can't practice that way. That's okay. They're not bad. No one is bad if they can't practice in this way. They're just different. But you need to be able to be clear about what recovery-oriented staff are and what skills and responsibilities they have. So look at your job descriptions. Read your job descriptions. What do they say? And how do you evaluate your staff? Are there any measures in there that are evaluating performance on recovery-oriented practice? Do you measure that at all? Look at what you measure in your evaluations. What about your supervisors? How are you doing supervision? Are you doing supervision at all? Supervision is something that we seem to have lost over the years. But you know what? My staff, Ruth and a number of other people, they are consummate professionals. And I supervise them 1 hour per week each and 2 hours per month altogether as a team. And you know what? It's the time to complain. It's the time to brainstorm. It's the time to come out with new innovative ideas, some of which are terrific, some of which aren't. It's an opportunity for me to pass info over. It's important. So are your supervisors really talking about recovery? Are they leading and inspiring? Are they developing a relationship? Are they able to be open? Are they allowing staff to be open about their own lived experience? That's something we're talking a lot about lately, because a lot of us go in this field because of our own issues, and then we sit and we hide it. So, are we able to be ourselves? And do we have a career ladder for peer staff? And do we have a career ladder for all staff? Or do staff begin to feel lost? Next one, Ruth. Thank you. And keep your eyes on the prize. What is it you want? What is it you want at the end? We run around our facility. We're so busy that we're not really looking. It's just like my story about not seeing the welcome sign. Take a walk through your space. What do you see? What does it feel like to be there? A lot of you are in a locked facility. I have been in locked facilities. Right off the bat, when that door locks behind you, right there, it doesn't feel so good. So what else is there? Are there stories of recovery on the wall? Is the furniture nice? I remember when I first walked into my agency, there were magazines in the lobby from like 10 years ago. No one is so poor that they can't afford, $10 for a couple of magazines that are current. Who wants to read a Newsweek from, 15 years ago? Although maybe we do, because it might have been a little bit better. But in general, walk through your space. See what you like. If you don't like it, change it. Those are easy things to do. Invite peer leaders to come and talk to people. There's nothing that shows recovery like someone who's already recovering and shares what there is out there, what kind of hope there is out there. Look at all your documentation, all your paperwork. Make sure that the language is clear, that it's not stigmatizing. Remember, we talked about language. And, share information, form committees, talk to each other, form committees across your unit. Information is only power when it's shared. When you keep it to yourself, it's powerless. Believe me. People hold on to information like it's the most important thing on earth. It's only important when we share it. And when people share information and they know what's going on, they work together to get to an end. The smartest teacher I ever had in social work school said to me, don't surround yourself with people who think exactly like you. Surround yourself with diversity, because that's how you get to a good outcome, by arguing out the details with people who look at things from a different way. Isn't that the basis of an interdisciplinary team? Ruth, next, please. And how will we know if it works? What'll it look like? What'll it look like if it's there? One of the things you can do is ask. My big thing with folks is, if you want to know why people aren't coming, or people are unhappy, or people asking a certain way, ask them. They really will tell you. In an inpatient unit, it's a little harder because people are being kept some against their will, and they're afraid. They don't want to be in a quiet room. They don't want to have their time increased. But if you ask in the right way, they will tell you, and then listen. And gather stories. Stories are great. We feel better when we hear stories about folks who've made it. And what do you do with your stories? Do you do satisfaction surveys? If you do them, who sees them? Do they go on the bottom of a drawer, or are they somewhere where folks can see them? Can people see that people get better? Can people see that that somebody liked something? So display them, look at them, share them, talk about them, have groups around them. Next, please. And always remember that change is really hard. There are people who like change. There are people who don't like change. It doesn't matter, whatever it is, whether you like it or you don't like it, it's hard. But those people who succeed in managing change, and think about this, think about anybody in your life who's successful having gone through some massive change. Those are folks who are open to new ways of thinking, who work with a team, who are good at talking to each other, who really are data-driven, and people who are willing to take a risk. and you can't take a risk unless someone's there to help you. So that's what the teamwork is about and the supervision is about. You know, it's something that you want someone to say, go ahead and give it a try. I'm not going to let you fall flat on your face. I'm going to be there. And if you fall, I'm going to be there to pick you up. So don't worry about that. Just go ahead and try. Go ahead, Ruth. Next, please. And so, next, please. I'm going to leave you for this little version before I turn you over to Ruth for a very quick sort of quality assurance lesson, is that it's very important for us who work in this field to have a vision and to hold on to a vision. And you have to, I mean, we know how difficult day-to-day is. And sometimes all you're doing is taking your finger out of one hole in the dike and putting it in another. And I am well aware of that, and so is Ruth. So I don't say this lightly. The only thing that gets me through is I never let go of the brass ring. Never. Because if I do, I'm going down and I'm not getting back up again. I know it. So I hold on for dear life. And the brass ring is my vision. And that vision is the belief that recovery is possible, even from the most disabling conditions, and that we are here to help people discover who they are and to get their hopes and dreams back up again, because we all deserve to have hopes and dreams. And we want to help people discover through their very own culture and values and skills and strengths who they are. They are not their illness. They are not determined by their symptoms. They're a person under all that. And we need to help them remember who that person was. And then we want to help them, once they remember who they were, we want to help them turn that into who they can be. And we want to assure that every single person, the person who looks, in quotes, high functioning, the person who looks, in quotes, low functioning, every person can reclaim a meaningful life role. And that is not easy to do. And Ruth, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you as we begin to wrap up a little.
Yes, so I will go through this fairly quickly. Being a leader, you know, we spoke about leadership, you know, a couple of minutes ago, and I don't want to go too detailed into it, but the most important thing is to ensure that your vision is shared and to clearly communicate it. And this is just doing that over and over again, and just with the understanding that day-to-day work life is very busy and people are occupying their days with you know, the problem at hand, and sometimes the bigger picture can get lost. And so as a leader, as a manager, whether that's an administrator, manager, supervisor, director, it's important to make sure to clearly communicate consistently that vision. And this is an example of an implementation process that you can do. It's the PDSA, or the Plan, Do, Study, Act, and it's the quality control model developed by Deming, and I think now that is the Deming Institute after he created it. But let's quickly look at some of these. And first, create recovery principles and values with multiple stakeholders. Well, what does that mean? Well, think about including people all along your continuum of the organization. So before, we talked about the administrative support staff, and you know, mentioned that fairly quickly. And it's true, you really need people at all levels in these implementation meetings. And this includes peers, people with a lived experience, or peer support staff, and their families. So families, family advisory council, whatever that is, it's really important to create those principles and values with those people in the same room simultaneously. Adopt a clear recovery-based mission. You know, that really is the backbone of the organization, and as long as it's distinct and clear, that's going to be your driving force. Identified needed practice changes. So we talked about, you know, what that would mean if it's training. You determine what that is, and that would be part of the PDSA. Plan a transformation team and include people in the entire planning process. And so yes, that is the multiple stakeholders we were talking about just a moment ago. Planning your staff training, and then include other strategies in implementing your vision. And it's hard to say what that would be because every organization or unit or institution is different, but you would know once you sit down to create this PDSA with your transformation team, these things will come out. So now you've got your plan, and then now it's time to implement your plan. So what that means creating your transformation team. And it's start immediately. I think that's the biggest thing. Time is not your friend. And so when you have a training, for example, this training and all the consultant work Edie is doing with you, to begin to do this immediately, because work can sometimes get in the way of work. And so we've got all these overarching goals and these visions, but our day-to-day can just get in the way. Encourage strong teamwork. And the most important thing here is that distractions happen, distractors happen. And so when you've got the team together, you really need to get your champions, the people who are really interested in seeing this come through. And they can be that change agent. They can be that cheerleader with their peers, with other clinicians, or in treatment team meetings, to be able to share the process, what's going on, and what we're doing and why we're doing that. Okay, fund and support. Wait a minute, where am I? I'm so sorry. Develop procedures, examine and modify, agency policies and procedures, and Edie already spoke to that. And one of the things that I really like to share with people is I don't know if you've heard this, is typically done in outpatient settings, the 3 strikes you're out rule. And essentially, if a patient doesn't show up for 3 times, that they automatically get discharged. And that was a policy that was put in place by a sister program that I did not supervise. And then our administration was like, yes, that works, because we're thinking about money, right? So when you think about money, sometimes you can lose the person-centeredness of everything. And so it was important for me to just really stand my ground and stick to recovery-oriented care. And that particular policy was not person-centered. And so think about things like that as you're looking at making these changes. And then, of course, lastly is to monitor those changes. And then study it. So we're getting together again and we're saying, all right, have we met our objectives? Have we met our targets? What is the outcome? Remember, Edie always said we're social workers, we love the process. We so love the process. I am learning to love the outcome. We're talking about hopes and dreams in terms of the people that we work with. So we're thinking about what's the outcome? How can I help them achieve wellness and happiness and having a purposeful life? And then, of course, as a program manager, I think about the outcomes of my services. Am I going to be a viable program in 2, 3, 4, 5 years? Are my services going to be wanted? Are we implementing engagement practices? Will the managed care companies refer people elsewhere because our outcomes aren't as good? And so I try to think of outcomes in both ways. Identify the obstacles to change, and you will, as just part of the PDSA, you will understand and come to see what that is. And then lastly, to do a corrective action plan. And hear the act. You determine what was good, determine if anything, needs to be changed or not, and identify your accomplishments. And I know we're running out of time, but that is just so important, to identify your accomplishments and really bring all the staff together and appreciate staff and appreciate all their changes, because even if you only move in the direction you're going towards slowly, you're still moving, and people need that validation, and they need to know that they're valued. Remember, so we want the people we work with to achieve happiness, purposeful life, and we also want our staff to be happy at work. And then lastly, to begin the cycle all over again and modify as necessary. And I'm sorry to run right through that. Okay, Edie.
But you did a great job with it. So we gave you a lot of information, and you do have the and I'm sorry for that. So I hope you did have a lot of coffee with it. You will have the slides, and we have some great questions. So we're going to go to that in a moment. But You know, this is hard work, and we go into this work, as I mentioned before. No, go ahead, Ruth. Go back to that, please. We go into that work. We go into this work not really to better, certainly not to make money. We go into this work to make the world a better place, and very often we're trying to make the world a better place than the one that we grew up in, and that's so for a lot of us. And so it's important for us to really feel like what we're doing is having an impact on people. And you know what? No matter how you provide services, you're having an impact on people. You're having an impact on people now, the way that you're caring and working with them. What we're suggesting is that we can actually make that impact even greater if we move in this direction. And that's what Ruth and I have found in our work, that when we move in this direction, we can have an impact that's even more significant. And so we want to leave you with this wonderful quote from Patricia Deegan, which says, "It's our job to ask people with psychiatric disabilities what it is they want and need in order to grow, and then to provide them with good soil in which a new life can secure its roots. And then it's our job, and this is the hard part, to wait patiently, because sometimes we're waiting a really long time. But it's our job to wait patiently and to sit with and to watch with wonder and witness with reverence the unfolding of another person's life. And if you were with me in the room, I would ask you to share with us how you have watched other people's life unfold. And I bet you that every one of you could share with us a place where you sat and watched with wonder as someone's life unfolded in a way that you had not expected. And so for that, we applaud you, and we thank you tremendously for sitting through an hour and 15 minutes of us talking at you. And we know that you are caring and terrific people, and that we're hoping that by instituting some of these things, that you may be able to reach your hopes and dreams with people a little faster. So next slide, Bruce. So we just want to thank you for listening to us. And what I want to do now is go to some of these great questions that we have. So I am going to start with the first one and say, what type of trainings did you do with staff to achieve transformation towards a recovery-oriented system? Ruth, you want to get that as the Director of Training and Development, who has about 30 trainings?
And my answer is actually going to be just from my experience having implemented recovery-oriented care. And one of the first things I did was realize that I had to expose people to the same training, to the same ideas that I was being exposed to. And so it was really important for me to dedicate those resources and get people in to be, for us to receive training and hear the same messages, or get my staff to NIAPR's trainings, for example, and for them to understand and hear what is recovery-oriented care and how does that match the vision that my new leadership is telling me. And so it starts with those pieces, right? And so the administrator has to really focus on that vision. But then the other thing, and I just have to mention that it's really important to understand, and Edie talked about this before, the language that we use. And the language that we talked about was really specific to our language with the people that we work with. But it's also important to pay attention to the language in the treatment team meetings when there are no patients available, no family members available, it's just us. And we end up using very judgmental language. And so it was important to me when I had my aha moment and I was changing the culture of my organization to reframe everything that my staff said that was judgmental or traditional. And I reframed everything in a person-centered way. Or I would ask questions. So what do you mean that that she doesn't want to come. Why doesn't she want to come? Have you called? Have you found out? Maybe she's actually doing really, really well. So instead of being judgmental, to be able to dig a little deeper to find out what it is. I guess that's my answer to that.
Yeah, I'll just add, I agree totally. No, I agree totally, and I'll just add concretely for you, we have a sort of foundational package that we do where we do what we just did with you, kind of what is recovery is one training. We talk about how to create a relationship that's recovery oriented, sort of a little bit of what Ruth talked about with engagement, but much more in depth. We talk about language and the power of language. Again, a little bit of what we talk to you, but we go more in depth, and then we move into skills training. So we then talk about what is person-centered care, what is culturally competent care is another training, and how do you move your practice towards being culturally competent. Recently, we have been moving towards how do we deal with anti-oppressive practice. So not only should we be culturally competent, but how do we practice in an anti-oppressive way? And so we move towards those kinds of pieces. We talk about trauma and the impacts of trauma and re-traumatization and how we can do that without even thinking about it. And so we move towards that. And we also are very specific about RAP trainings, advanced directive trainings. And then Ruth has supervisory and management trainings where we talk about good supervision, recovery-based supervision. And I talk very often to CEOs and hospital administrators, which I'll be doing out with you guys next week, about how recovery is good business. Because even though I'm a social worker, I've been a manager for years, and so I really talk about how, from the management perspective, your revenues increase and your bottom line, you get way in the black rather than the red when you move in a recovery way. So that's sort of the specific answer to add on to Ruth's answer as well. This next question I love. I'm going to take a stab at it, Ruth, and then I'm going to let you, just because it's in front of me. How do you support individual decision-making and self-direction and dream when the system kills that hope, even when it is reasonable? At a practitioner level, these changes are easy, but the system can undermine even the best of services. How do you address that opening the door to self-determination can be harder than maintaining individuals in an institution culture where familiar practices are easier? That is the million-dollar question, and I'm going to tell you that I'm not going to lie to you. Organizational change is much easier from the top down than from the bottom up. But change can happen from any which way. In order for change to happen, there has to be some kind of dissatisfaction, either internal or external. In your state right now, there's both. There is both internal and external dissatisfaction. You and your administrators want to do better and want to create a recovery-oriented way and want to provide self-direction and want to allow people to get better, and they want you to be able to practice in that way. And from outside, from what I read in the newspapers, there's a lot of pressure for you to also move in, they're not saying particularly that direction, but to move in a different direction. And so what I say to you is that this is the business side of me. When you embrace what we're talking about, accidents go down, violence goes down, people get better more quickly, staff feel safer and will take more risks because they feel safer, and the outcomes start to get better. And you already have the movement going, and every individual can practice this way, because even if the system is trying to push you down, it's our job to push back against it. Remember I said, never let go of the brass ring? Even in NIAPRS, which is the most wonderful peer-operated organization, sometimes the baloney can make me, can get us all, where's the budgets? Why can't we find them? Where's my papers? How come the copier is broken? There's a million things that go on, but you never let go of the brass ring. So yes, it's hard, but you have the power within you to make that change. And I'm hoping that next week when I'm there, I can talk with you guys as well as your administrator about how you have the power to make those changes. Ruth, you want to
I
add
just
something?
think the only thing I want to add to that was very comprehensive, but the only thing I want to add is that you have to tackle this both ways, right? So don't be disheartened. You need to persevere and keep going at it, because this is happening both ways. Remember, we talked about your practice, so it's happening on the one-on-one level, and it's also happening on the system level. And sometimes that will be harder than your one-on-one. Not sometimes, mostly that's harder than just a one-on-one. And so that's where you start. You start with your practice.
Yeah. I mean, I always say to folks, you really can't change anybody else. You can only change yourself. But if a number of us change ourselves, everything changes. You have to bear with me. I'm like an old 60s hippie. So it becomes that, there has to be somebody who gets started. So why isn't it you? Why isn't it me? Someone's got to start somewhere. The next question is for you, Ruth. You mentioned money is not always.
Maybe you should answer it. I was thinking maybe you should answer it.
Okay, I'll give it a try.
So I'll read it to you. Yes, I did say that, but maybe you could answer it. So Ruth, you mentioned money is not always person-centered. I couldn't agree more. How can you make managing quote-unquote security more person-centered, especially a culture of security? I work in forensics.
So I got a real education when I ran my agency. It was the first time that I worked with people with addictions. And the director of my addictions program used to say to me, Edie, there's choice even in drug court. You could choose to go to treatment or you could choose to go to prison. It's your choice. And so, so that's really stuck with me. I think that working in forensics, working behind a locked door in a unit in a psychiatric hospital, working with mandated clients in an addictions program, all of those things are they're very trying to being person-centered. Also, I work crisis where I went into people's houses, and I have walked into people's houses where I open the door and they're standing there with a shotgun in their hand. So it's like I get security. I remember when I was a beginning social worker, I was like, I don't believe in restraints. I don't believe in this. And then I was in someone's house all by myself while they were a little out of control. My ideas changed. So I'm not talking from nowhere, but I will say that the way that you do this is you go back to these slides where we talked about what recovery-oriented, person-centered work is and about maximizing choice, and you do it within the confines of what you have. So let's take security. We know that locking someone in a room all by themselves does not actually work as well as putting them in a comfortable room with the door open with somebody in the doorway. That actually works better. People have done some studies on that. So that's one choice. So you would know best about what choices you can make. The most important thing is for you to be safe and for the other clients in your unit to be safe. So you cannot let someone who's going to hurt someone go off and do it because that's their choice. That was what I was saying before when I was hinting at, choice is one thing, but you got to have safety. So safety and security are ultimately the most important issue. But do you do safety and security in a draconian, way where everybody is squashed and chained to a corner? Or do you do it in the most respectful way that you can? Remember I told you, when I moved my agency towards recovery, a third of my staff moved on. No one left under horrible circumstances screaming and yelling in a disrespectful way. You do not have to fire people in a disrespectful way. You can always find something about someone, usually, that has something positive. Same thing with security. You need to stay safe. You need to do what's safe, but you need to look at the choices. There are lots of articles, and we're going to talk a little bit about seclusion and restraint when we're there with you next week. But there are ways to do this. And I'll just end with, I know you all are trying that, but then you get these pressures from the outside because of social control. We have that in New York. People get scared of people who have psychiatric disabilities, and all these rules and regulations come on. They can't do this, they can't do that, keep them locked away. You just have to fight against that and hold on to the brass ring. I don't have a good answer for you for that one. But you need to know personally what you're going to do. I'm going to treat people. I'm going to stay safe, and I'm going to keep myself, the staff, and the other patients safe. But I'm going to treat this person in a respectful way, because underneath what I see there is a human being. And that human being deserves respect, no matter what they're doing at the moment. And I'm going to reach in for the healthy part of them while I'm protecting everybody. Not easy to do, but it can be done.
Great answer.
All right. Any other questions? There are not. And we are to the bottom of our hour and a half. So I guess I just want to say thank you so very much for being so attentive. Even though I can't hear you, I see you're all still here. So, and I see that my dog in there is barking. So I guess it's time to move on. And thank you. Thank you. And thank you for the folks who were writing in that they enjoyed it. We enjoyed talking with you. Ruth, you want to have the last word?
Yes. Thank you so much. And I wish we had more time, because I've got loads of stories that really help to take what we learned and just see how it directly impacted my experiences. But we gave you, I think, enough, and you're really lucky for next week. And you've got Edie. She is my mentor. And that's one of the reasons I came to NIAPR, so I could be supervised by Edie.
Well,
so you guys are very lucky. You enjoy next week, and thank you so much for having us.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, gosh. All right, guys. Thank you so much.